for this year's convention. A bunch of folk came together, and they threw out quite a few topics for workshops. And as I sat and I listened to folks come up with topic after topic, like, for example, one of the topics was about having a real high-quality education for our young people. There are several other topics, and what I noticed that there was a commonality that created the problems that each one of the workshops was supposed to solve. And so I propose that we have a theme that unites all of the workshops. And the theme that I proposed was underdevelopment, moving from underdevelopment and trauma to development and healing. Moving from underdevelopment and trauma to development and healing. And so what do we mean by underdevelopment and what do we mean by trauma? Oftentimes, if we talk about economic underdevelopment, people know what you're talking about. Our communities are economically undeveloped. They haven't developed businesses, a workforce, a consistent economic infrastructure. We talk about that kind of underdevelopment. People understand, but what does it mean to underdevelop a person? I want to make sure y'all know what I'm not talking about. Sometimes when we use the word underdeveloped, people are talking about like when people use the term like when people are born, and people have gotten away from that. They're born under. I don't mean someone was born underdeveloped. I mean that the society underdeveloped them. And all too often in our country, our society does not put things in place to fully develop its people. For example, if you go to Whitney Young High School right now, or any one of the selective enrollment high schools, you will see 200 different development opportunities for the children there. They have a music program to develop your sense of music and music theory. They have a debate program so young people can develop the ability to form and create and argue and create a good argument. But if you come to some of the schools where a lot of our people are, those programs to develop people are not in place. Another thing I want to say in terms of to figure out this development thing, I want to make this a little interactive. If I say he learned the notes on the piano, because there's a difference between learning and developing. There's a difference between learning and developing. If I say he learned the notes on the piano, well, how is that different than me saying he developed into a great pianist? If I say he learned the notes on the piano and then he developed into a great pianist, those are two very different things. What is the difference? And I'm asking you all, what do you think the difference is between learning and developing? I heard a really good answer over here. What was that? What is the difference between learning and developing? She said one brings you to the door and the other lets you all the way through. Which one brings you to the door, learning or development? Learning gets you to the door. Development brings you all the way through. And all too often in our city, our young people, they focus on learning, which is important. But if you don't have development, you're missing the critical steps. Development is putting people in a place where they can apply what they learn. Development is putting people into a place where they can be exposed to different worlds. You know, the young people who join the debate club, not only do they learn how to debate, but then they're exposed to all the different worlds that they encounter when they travel to debate other teams. They learn the etiquette. They learn the dress. They learn that there's a whole lifestyle to debating. Same with musicianship. And so it's different to learn than it is to develop. We need learning and development, and our communities are often underdeveloped. And so we want to move from learning, from underdevelopment and trauma to development and healing. Our last thing I'll say is in terms of trauma part. When we talk about trauma, oftentimes we think about a traumatic experience. Trauma is more than a traumatic experience. Trauma is like a memory stored in your body. Have you ever did something and said, why in the world did I do that? Like you did something that you thought was stupid. Like, why in the world did I do that? Oftentimes we do that because of a traumatic memory in our body. Our body reacts, and we don't even realize it's our body reacting and not our minds. And so we want to move from underdevelopment and trauma to developing healing because that trauma needs to be healed. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Thank you all so much for listening, and here's the panel.
Thank you so much. Come on, y'all, make some noise. How y'all doing out there? So again, this is our Education Day. We have an action-packed weekend full of activities. We have a few panels today that will address health disparities, higher education, and funding for our children. And then after that, we have some more entertainment on today. Tomorrow is our Women's Day. We have a lot of speakers that will be here representing our women's session. And then tomorrow night will be our Young Professionals reception upstairs in the community room. And then Saturday is the big day. The push is on live here at headquarters. We have some great speakers, Bishop Barber, Michael McBride, and Leah Daltrey from the DNC. So please come back and celebrate with us all weekend. But right now, I'm bringing to the stage our first panel pushing for a high quality public education for every child. And this panel will be moderated by Dr. Sonya Whitaker, and she would let her panelists introduce themselves. Let's show some love to Dr. Whitaker and her panel.
What's up, beautiful people? I must admit, when Reverend Jeanette said we were going to go outside, I said, say what? But this feels good. It feels really, really good to be out here in the streets where the magic happens. It brings me great honor every time I'm introduced to sit and be in front of you. I've had a lot of experiences as a public school teacher and administrator, and so one thing I want to share, and I'm sure my panelists will agree, we do not make the mistake of assuming that anyone within the sound of our voice is an empty vessel waiting to be filled by our knowledge. We know that that is not the case, but we hope to be able to have taken all the experiences that we've had and provide some insight about where our community, where our state, and where our country should be headed. And so I'm going to start off by asking the panelists to tell you a little bit about their background so that you can make some connection to them.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here. My name is Shaunta Greywill. I am a school board member in the south suburbs of Chicago, also the vice president of the Linwood Chamber of Commerce. My professional background is real estate. I'm a real estate appraiser and real estate broker for about 25 years. So happy to be here today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hello, hello.
Hello, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barbara Mullens. I am a proud Chicago Public Schools graduate from Cary High School, a Chicago Public Schools teacher. Starting out, I've moved all across the country, but now I'm the superintendent just outside of Rochester, New York. Very proud to be here and to share space and time with you all today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can we give it up for Rainbow Push Coalition? All right. Listen, my name is Alan Connolly. I am the director of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with Chicago Public Schools, born and raised here in Chicago on the South Side, product of Percy L. Julian High School. Any Jaguars in the house? And so just happy to be here and share with you all on today.
And so, as has been shared, I am Dr. Sonya Whitaker. I'll be brief. I know a lot of you already know my background. I'll share just a little because, again, my goal is to make a connection. I have the honor of being a parent. I've served as superintendent of schools in 2 different school districts. I've also had the honor, good to you. I've had the honor of serving in the capacity of Deputy Superintendent of Schools, and I also have conversations with educators across the nation about what's happening in public education. And I always start my conversations by suggesting that when most people are asleep after they get off work, that's when I go to my second work. I am really passionate about my people. I'm really passionate about, when I say my people, and anybody that supports us. And I feel a fundamental obligation, like I know everyone on this panel does, that the good Lord has blessed me with gifts, talents, and multiple degrees, and I have an obligation to stay up all day and all night and do what I can for the betterment of my people. And so that's why I'm here. With that being said, oh, yay, look at God. Oh, did I say that on the hot mic? My panelists, they are going to get her situated. But why don't I do this while we're doing that? I'm going to go ahead and just keep talking for a second about what's at stake, because that's what leaders do, right? What's at stake, you all? We're getting ready. I'm not going to get political, but I think I would be remiss not to acknowledge how much is at stake right now as it relates to public education. And we're all clear about the fact that we're less than 100 days before the election of a new president for the United States of America. And so as we here at Rainbow Push and Push Excel continuing conversation about what is it going to take to ensure that Black students reach their fullest intellectual capabilities, we began to not only think about what should happen at the school level and the district level, but what should happen at the policy level or the federal level. In my humble estimation, feel free to tell me if you don't agree, what's at stake is the elimination of the U.S. Department of Education. And yes, I do intend to influence you by suggesting that the elimination of the U.S. Department of Education would actually not be a good thing for Black and brown children. The U.S. Department of Education, although they're far removed from what happens at the state and the district level, in some way, they have a level of responsibility to monitor and also keep a close eye on the use of the financial resources allocated across the nation. What is at stake is that there is a chance that if we eliminate the U.S. Department of Education, that all of the financial oversight will go to the community level with no oversight at the federal level, and I think that's problematic in nature. What is also at stake is the expansion of programs like voucher programs and what is called education savings accounts. Essentially, what is at stake is that we run the risk, depending upon what happens with leadership, of taxpayer dollars that are designed to support our public schools going to support private schools that far too often Black and brown children can't get to. That's what is at stake. What else is at stake? And you all, this is really huge. As a school district official, I know this. The elimination of the funds allocated to our Title I. Those are the majority of the funds outside of the federal funds that we got as a result of COVID. Our Title I funds are used to help pay for our free and reduced lunch programs. Many of you know, and I appreciate the nods that I'm getting, many of you know that we're in systems where we provide our students breakfast, and we provide our students lunch, and we provide our students dinner. So what is at stake is if leadership changes over and priorities change, school districts who are already limited in funding will not be able to continue unless they make massive cuts in their spending in different categories to fund breakfast, lunch, and dinner for our students. There are many more things that are at stake, but I'm going to let them come out organically in my brief question and answer session here with our esteemed panelists. Greetings, Queen. Thank you for being here. Can you tell our viewing audience here a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jamaica Thomas. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Bessemer, Alabama. That's right outside of Birmingham. I do apologize for being late. I did just get off a plane and jump in a car, and here I am. You saw me cross in front of you with my luggage. So I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm ready to talk about what needs to be talked about.
Oh, let's go. I feel like we should have the drum roll. So, ladies, I have a gentleman, our king, at the end of the stage here. I've given what I think is at stake for public education, in my humble estimation. I'd like each of you, and you can jump right in. Let's just be natural and organic. Feel free to talk on top of one another and add value. My goal is kind of fade back a little. So my direct question is, what would you identify as key topics or issues impacting education today?
Okay, all right. I would start the conversation. I think you named a whole lot of things, but I would say not just our democracy, so our ability to actually continue to govern, but our ability to do it better. Because to quote the great late Whitney Houston, I believe the children are the future. But what we really lose when we don't fully fund, I think, give the opportunities to students that they need is the students' ability to create something better than we can even imagine for ourselves, right? We don't want to just maintain the status quo. We want the next generation to be able to do it better. And if we don't even give them the minimum of what we were able to have and really redress some of those inequities that have already started, then we lose out on the opportunity to have a beautiful, unknowable future that can come to pass. So yes, democracy, but also what the world could look like if we fully gave an opportunity to every child to be great.
Sure, thank you. I think to add value to education and for education for our people today, one of the things we have to be cognizant of is that you can pump millions of dollars into a school, but if you still have a public safety issue, you're still going to have issues with that school. When we look at Chicago public schools, many of our young people go to schools where if it's a neighborhood school, they have to worry about whether or not they're going to get to school and whether they can get home from school. Me being a product of Perseo Julian High School, I remember there were days when school was out, when basketball practice was over. I had to put my school jacket in my bag so that rivals from other schools didn't know that I was a Jaguar. Now today, things are a little bit more serious than that, where we have more guns in this country than we have people. We have to start valuing our people, and I think that it starts, one, at the community level, at the policy level. If we can put policies in place that say that this is what we need for the success of black students. Many of our parents know exactly what their children need to be successful, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to stop acting like our parents and people in community do not know what their children need. You all know exactly what your child needs to be successful, and we have to lift up those voices and make sure that those voices are heard today.
And to add to that, thank you, Dr. Sonya Whitaker, for bringing out those issues about funding public education. But to add to that, funding public education is critical. And as you all probably in the state of Illinois, south side of Chicago, south suburban areas of Chicago, you are learning or hearing a lot more about what's happening with our property tax dollars and how property taxes are funding education. To lose the Department of Education would be critical, a critical detriment to our communities. We cannot lose that type of funding. We're already struggling in a lot of our communities funding education. We're already having issues and concerns about property taxes and affordable housing. And so losing the Department of Education would be detrimental to many of our communities.
All right. For me, I think I'm bringing more of a national thought process of what could happen, but also thinking about more of a local level for us in Alabama. Particularly in my school system, our board members are elected. And so when I think about what's at stake is having the right people in the right place on a local level because they influence what we do in education. If you were to look up my system right now, you will see that we are one of 2 systems in the state of Alabama that is in the middle of a state takeover. What does that mean for us? After a 6 or 7 month investigation, the state superintendent found that our board members did not have the capacity to lead. And what they found is that it was not the teachers, it was not the students, It was not the parents, it was not the superintendent, or any of us that are at the board, at work in capacity of directors. What they found is that our actual elected officials did not have the capacity to lead. So they did not do the due diligence in guiding us. So board governance is what brought a state takeover. So for us, on a local level, when we think about voting and we think about all of the capacities that are needed, for us in our state, what we have to decide is that every vote matters, not just for government officials, but for our board members. And so if that is the case, then we need to know that one vote does matter.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanna advance the conversation. Two things I want to suggest that we will spend the first part of our time together identifying issues impacting public education so that we can not admire them, but then move toward our recommended solutions. But we do have to recognize that we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that May marked the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. 70 years ago, U.S. Supreme Court justices ruled segregation in America's public schools as being unconstitutional. And from that moment on, there have been efforts to ensure that that doesn't happen. In fact, many would argue that our schools are as segregated today as they were 70 years ago, which means far too often we are having to do the good work of working to figure out, with our expertise and resources, how to educate children in schools where a greater majority, for example, of black students, the research says, and we know, are in schools where there are black students. And the greater majority of America's white students are not in schools where black students exist. But let me talk about what people, and have you respond to what people don't talk about enough. And that is what happened to the black teachers and black principals 70 years ago when the U.S. Supreme Court justices ruled segregation in America's school as being unconstitutional. We know that across our nation we are experiencing a national teacher crisis. That's one topic. But if you pay close attention, you'll continue to hear educators say, we need more and black, brown educators in the profession, without acknowledging what happened 70 years ago. 70 years ago, as a result of discrimination, black leaders were demoted. Black leaders were fired. Black leaders were taken out of their positions when black students needed them the most. And in my humble estimation, 70 years later, which is why in the middle of a national teacher crisis, we're asking where the black leaders are. We're asking where the black students, black teachers are, and we're suggesting that we need them to be there. I think black folks need to have a real conversation about what's happening in black school districts right now during a time when black students need us most. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I would. So I think
Thank you.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I always maintain 50, 60, 70 now years after Brown versus Board that is imperative for people to understand is that we did not want to integrate schools just to be up under white children. And I will name that and say that boldly be on Facebook Live. My board members know who they hired, so I will say it again. We did not just want to be up under white children. We said separate but equal was not real. It wasn't a true thing. And what I would name is that while the rainbow is beautiful, while having, multiculturalism is amazing and we bring so many different things to the table, what we have to acknowledge is that prior to, and these are the things I learned when I worked in New England, is that we had freedom schools, is that schools were not segregated always in Providence, Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, in those other places. And so it wasn't until we were educated alongside white children that then now there's an achievement gap. We had black literary societies. Hear me now. For a group of people who were not allowed to read, less than 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, we had black literary societies. That's Ghulam Muhammad's work.
Wow.
Okay, so Don't tell me what we can't do, but all of a sudden, when my greatness is compared to someone who has had privilege in this country, now all of a sudden, I am inadequate. Now all of a sudden, there's an achievement gap. No. There's not an achievement gap. There's an opportunity gap. And we talk a lot about that work when we talk about culturally responsive teaching. When we talk about the things that you can't say below the Mason-Dixon line. Hello, and I'm looking at my cousin. Y'all didn't know that we're family. We're family. But she understands the context. And so when you talk about why we don't have educators of color, that's on purpose. There's only 1.2% of the nearly 15,000 districts in this state, in this country, are ran by Black women. I'm one. And we have a group chat, and we say I'm one of one. But 1.2% of superintendents are Black women. One of one. And the paucity and turnover is about 2 years. And so as I go in my second year as a superintendent, I name and I say out loud that if we're going to have a conversation about what's at stake, it is in fact the ability to help children and call children by their names. Brilliant. That is their birthright. Don't walk away from this conversation thinking, woe is in doom. Our children have literacies and brilliance that we have to recognize. And so before we put more Black people in front of our children, we have to unlearn some things. There is anti-Blackness in us, and we have to heal from that before we go in front of our kids and say, well, you know, if you want to survive this world, you can't show up the way you are. Wrong. I show up every day with my board members, and I say, I am a Black woman. Don't you forget it? And they just love me more and more, and I love them. But that's really what's happening in the conversation we need to have today.
So I want to thank you. I want to move us advance from that statement and move us toward having a conversation about what is it going to take to ensure that Black students reach their fullest academic potential. In other words, we know that research would suggest that Black students are being outperformed far too often, not always, because I'm very careful not to make sweeping generalizations, but far too often Black students are being outperformed by their white peers. What I'm struggling with on top of that is far too often data would suggest that Black students are being outperformed by students whose native language is other than English. What I want us to begin to think about is, now I want to connect that dot to the fact that research suggests that we have to have Black teachers in front of them, and we have to have Black principals in front of them. I'm going to say that we have to have Black leaders in the cabinet and the Black female leaders. I don't want anybody sitting in this audience to go to sleep on a very important point that I spent a lot of time with over the last 2 weeks, several weeks rather. Only 1.2% of the Black superintendents or deputy superintendents in the United States of America is Black female. And when we begin to look at the academic achievement levels of Black and brown children and we say, what can we begin to do to ensure they reach their fullest intellectual potential, I'm saying don't ignore that and go back to the teaching and learning piece of it. We have to be at the helm. And so I'm going to turn the microphone over to someone to answer again. The direct question is, how do we go about improving the learning experience? We have parents here. At the end of the day, no matter what we say, they want to know that their children will be able to graduate and get a job. So what do you suggest that we do with all of the experiences sitting on this panel to improve the learning experiences for Black, brown students and students experiencing the impact of poverty, which includes white children?
Indeed. Sure, okay. You know, we have to look at what you stated previously about the Black educators, not just at the superintendent level, but even in that classroom. You can have a teacher that looks exactly like you, and they may not have the cultural competency to deal with you. Cultural competency is a very real thing that is needed in our schools today. When we wonder why we don't have enough Black educators, many of our young people don't see what they can be. And it's unfair for us to expect young people to be something that they've never been exposed to. So when we see our young people engaging in illicit behavior or what have you, and we say, oh, that they should know better, Why should a young person know better if they haven't been exposed to better? When we can expose our young people to educators that look like them, who've had experiences like them, and even if they have not had the experiences that they've had, if they have taken time out to get into their shoes, to be empathetic and lead with love. I tell you, my mother, who was an educator for over 35 years, she was not a DEI hire. My mother taught because she wanted to teach. Now we have to get, it's a shame that we have to say this, but we're just trying to raise up young black and brown educators because we need them to teach. But it should not be that should not be the case. But I think that if we're looking to see improvements in education for black and brown children, we have to raise up educators that look like them, that know them, and have the cultural competency to deal with them.
I also want to add, I think that's very important, but one of the more important aspects to educating our students is parents being involved. And most of the South suburban schools, I'm not going to say even most, I'm going to say some of the South suburban schools, we have a low parental support, and that needs to change. Education starts from home. I remember when our youngest daughter, we were preparing for her, we started in the womb. We started educating her in the womb. We started reading to her. We started talking to her. We started developing her language skills in the womb. Having parents involved in the educational process is a must. It's a mandate. We can't expect the teachers, the administrators to do absolutely everything to give our children all of the directions. Parents have to get involved at this point.
Thank you. I was thinking about if we have black leaders and educators in the classroom, black and brown, what's next? I think that we have to think outside of the box and think about what do individual students need in order to achieve. We do that for IEPs, IELPs, 504s. We have all these acronyms in education. But it makes me think about an experience or a situation I had just the other day. As an assistant principal, I had a student, 6th grade, he would fail. He would be in summer school. 7th grade, fail, summer school. 8th grade, fail, summer school. And so we had this repeated cycle of him not meeting the mark during the school year, but coming and going to summer school to recover those courses. In high school, he repeated that same pattern, 9th grade, 10th grade. Finally, something clicked. And in him, there was a motivation that was met with my innovation. And so we started a plan for him where he could not only recover the grades or the credits that he had in 9th and 10th grade, but he decided that he wanted to graduate early. And so we recovered and we attained. This student was able to graduate early. I met him on the campus of Miles College where I'm an adjunct, and I did not know he was there. I was walking into my building Tuesday, and I saw him, and my face lit up, and his face lit up, and he said, Dr. Thomas, I'm on the football team. I'm at Miles. And I thought about how many of us can be innovative enough, think outside the box enough, and care enough for individual students to know what they need in order to move them forward. Yes, we have checklists. Yes, there are things that are great practices for us to do. But if there are ways for us to be innovative and think about those individual kids and what they need, the least of these, the most marginalized, how can we get those? Because they don't have an achievement gap, they have an opportunity gap. So what opportunities are we providing these students so they can be on an even playing field and excel like anyone else?
So I want to talk about the ban on books. We're talking about what it takes to ensure that our students are successful academically. We also know that our children cannot be what they cannot see. And so without giving a response, I'll just make a statement. I want us to begin to think about what does it mean to have books banned from classrooms that reflect the spirits, the lives, the histories, and the intellectual capabilities of Black students. As a point of information, as of April 2023, we were informed that at least 32 states in our country banned books. Also, I want to share with you that the 3 states that have banned the most books in the United States of America today are Texas, who have banned 438 books, Florida, who has banned 357 books, and Missouri, who has banned 315 books. And so I'll ask my distinguished panelists, what is your response to the ban on books? And what is the potential implication for that, not only as it relates to Black students, but students of other cultural and ethnic backgrounds?
Because I thought about this question, definitely. So for me, and I'll tell you a little bit about my district, we are a majority African-American as far as demographics. We have a little bit less than 3,000 students. We have 1 high school, 1 middle school, and 5 elementary schools. For me, it was my mission to make sure that students had books in their hands over the summer, during the year, that reflected them. We have a rising Hispanic population, and I made sure that we had Hispanic, Latino characters that were at the forefront of at least 3 to 6 of our books. You have to be intentional. Now, for those who are in other situations, you have to also be creative. I'm a member of the National Council of Teachers of English, and in one of our sessions last year, I remember something very creative that one of the teachers said in response to banned books. She encouraged all of her students to get a library card from the New York Public Library. Anybody, any citizen of the United States can get a library card from the New York Public Library, and they can check out any book electronically that they want to check out. So now what we have to think about are for people who are in very strict districts where they have to, they got to keep a paycheck. So, you got to keep your job. But how can you be strategic in exposing students? That was one way that she did it, and it was a light bulb for me. Because when we're thinking about students having access to banned books, you have to figure out, how do we provide them access? It might not be from a local library. It might not be from your school library, but they can get a library card from the New York Public Library, and that can provide them access.
That's my cousin, everybody. I'm so proud of her. From a systems level, I would say the one thing is, so in upstate New York, a lot of people think I'm in Manhattan. I'm literally 5.5 hours north of Manhattan. And so I'm still a very purple community, meaning when I look at my, and Dr. Thomas talked about it earlier about voting and how critical that is and important it is, when people vote their values. They vote for board members that reflect the things that they talk about. They vote for, if they're listening to a certain pundit, they come and localize their values on a ballot. And sometimes in the state of New York, we vote for the budget. We're one of the last states where the community gets to vote on the budget. Wouldn't that be great? Y'all get to go cast a vote if you keep the budget or not, right? But my community does. And when I look at the exit polls, I get all kind of stuff. You teaching that CRT, you trying to turn boys into girls, you trying to do this, all of the politics and their political beliefs come out on the exit polls, and literally you are just voting yay or nay on a budget or a referendum around capital improvements or something. But you see how people feel about certain things on that ballot. And sometimes my office gets a call and says, they were talking about this book on X News, or they were talking about this thing in this group chat on Facebook, this very conservative group. Are you teaching that? Flat out email me. Are you teaching that? Are you calling that? And what you will find, what I just found out, is that there are 6 people that are responsible for the majority of the book bans in the nation. Just 6 people. So then you have to ask, who is empowered and who's not empowered? Whose voice is really being the loudest? We're sitting here thinking, wow, it's all these people taking up arms, banning these books across all these states. It's 6 people, y'all. So when people say, I don't like politics, we shouldn't be talking about politics. I want you to think about the word politics and substitute it for the word power. Now, do you want to disengage in that? Because in this country, your vote is your voice. Your conversation with your elected officials is your voice. These 6 people, these 4 or 5 little groups are wielding a lot of power because they are using it. And when you don't use your power, now people are telling you what your children can and can't read. Now people are telling you how your children are going to be educated. And you asked about students of other race and ethnicity and identities. It's critical that when they read The Bluest Eye, it is not about a black person. It is about so many different themes. When they're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, it's not black or white. It is about so many different universal themes that children of all races and identity are missing out on. And when you don't use your voice to vote on a budget, to vote on a school board member, to vote on the things that you want to be seeing in your schools, on funding formulas in the General Assembly, you are allowing a few people to dictate what happens to your children. And I don't know about y'all, but that is slavery. When somebody tells you the trajectory of your life, you are enslaved. And your voice is your vote, and that is freedom.
So we have about, I know, right? Nice round of applause. We have just a few minutes left. But you know, you did a great job. So all of you all. I want to address one other point and then move into recommendations, because many of you that are here, you are folks who are very powerful. You have influential positions starting from parent and the like. And so I want to make sure we move towards some recommendations that you can kind of have in your toolkit when you go back to do the good work that you're doing. We all know that the best thing that we can put in front of our students is a good teacher. Black teacher, white teacher, it doesn't matter. We know representation matters, but we need good teachers in front of our students. We also know that we're experiencing a national teacher crisis. And so my direct question to you is going to be why do you think that this exists? And more importantly, what do you think we should do about it to make sure that Black, brown children whose native language is other than English, children who are experiencing the impact of poverty, which includes white children, how do you respond to that?
For me, I think that more parents need to think about being educators. And
Amen.
I'll tell you why. We used to have a program called Parents as Substitute Teachers, PAST, Parents as Substitute Teachers. And parents were able to go in, see the academic environment, and really understand that they could do this. Like, if you do it at home, you really can do it in a school, right? And so some of our parents went from substitute teachers to paraprofessionals, and they went from paraprofessionals to teachers. And so what we need to do is think about how can we build the capacity of people who are already in our building, people who already come in our building. I have an example of one of our teachers, her son was a substitute in another county. And I said, he needs to come over here to us, to Bessemer. He can be a para over here. And so he became a paraprofessional while he was working on his elementary education degree. He was able to start retirement at the age of 20 because he was a paraprofessional at the age of 20. He has been hired as an elementary 3rd grade teacher and is teaching 3rd grade starting this year.
Amen.
Right? So when we think about recruiting and we think about what's needed, I think that if we have parents who are looking to change a career, because that's what we're seeing now, we have emergency certified or certificated people who are coming into our school districts They might teach at the bank on Friday, and we put them in a classroom on Tuesday. It just depends, and we do the best that we can because they have a heart and they want to teach, and we do have a teacher shortage. But I think that parents, if you think about a different career, or if you think about this is something that you want to do, some of us used to play school when we were younger and thought, man, I want to be just like the teacher. Guess what? It's not too late. You can still do this.
Absolutely excellent. And she took the words out of my mouth because it was quite a bit of what I've always wanted to just express, and that is parent involvement. Parent involvement in education is so vital and so important to our students. And if we can get proper funding for parent universities and things that will help encourage parents to get more involved, we would do our children and our community so much better. So parent involvement is necessary.
I absolutely agree with that. Parent University, many people don't know here in Chicago that we have 13 parent universities around the city. In those parent universities, we have so many workshops, whether it's around for our English learners, whether it's around computer courses. We collaborate with the city colleges of Chicago. I see my colleague, Brother Nathaniel Ward, standing in the back. But we have these strategic partnerships so that we can educate our parents, because education doesn't only take place in the classroom, but it can take place at the community level as well. And in those spaces, when you talk about those books that are being banned, we need to educate the community on what are those books, what's in those books. And when you begin to see what's in those books and why they're banning them, then you will understand why your voice and your vote is so critical. Not only do we have the parent universities, but also as the director of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, I'm privy to head up faith-based partnerships. And I tell you, many people don't trust the government right now. They don't trust who they pay taxes to, but they do trust who they pay their tithes and offerings to. And so that's why we try to leverage the faith community as those beacons of trust, because we need to come together as a community to educate one another, educate our parents so that they can know that they can make a difference in our schools. Chicago is the only school district that has local school councils. Local school councils are the governing body of that school. And so when people complain about what's taking place in their schools, they don't realize that they can go right down to that school and participate in those local school council meetings. If they live in the community, they can run to be on that local school council. Just of a show of hands, how many people are on a local school council here in Chicago? Any local school council? See, Nate's a local school council member. But those are very pragmatic ways that the community and parents can get involved to make a difference in their schools.
Yep, and so I'll just take it from kind of a political legislative perspective in terms of the things that parents should be advocating for if they want to have very strong educators in their classroom. If you decide that, hey, I am a second career and I want to go into classrooms, it is difficult to raise a child and then do coursework and then do the field work. And so I think that when I think about the workforce development that needs to happen, there is a repair that needs to happen. I know many states have reparations committees, and people are scratching their head as to how do we pay back that 40 acres and a mule? Who gets it? Who gets a check? And I would say investing in this pipeline is one of many ways we can begin doing that. Having state and federal legislation that has standards around teacher preparation across the states is very important. Investing a lot of money. Of course, we have those Teach Plus grants. Of course, we have grants that say, you know, we'll do loan forgiveness and all of those other things, but people have to wait. That's a latent response. Generation Z is in the classroom now. This is like the second year that we have now had Gen Z. They're looking at their friends saying, I work for Google and I can work from Tulum or whatever it is, Mexico, and do my job. And then the rest of the kids are like, well, I got to show up at 6 o'clock. And it's really difficult to recruit a workforce when they have access to technology, when their benefits are looking a lot different. When, you know, and the only thing you can tell your friend at Google is, well, we're organized, we get collective bargaining agreement, so I can't even really bargain on my own. And what I really do appreciate about that is we need to be listening to our labor partners who are telling us what they need. And what I would say is our officials need to not put us against our labor partners as management and say, well, y'all just got to sit in the ring and duke it out. The legislators need to be able to have a conversation about how we're going to make those conditions for our educators fiscally solvent. Because we can't bankrupt systems trying to give educators and the next generation of educators what they need by fighting in a room with them. We need to be able to pay our educators. We need to be able to bring the next generation of educators to the workforce. And I believe that the federal and state government and the business community needs to subsidize that.
So that's a great into some closing remarks around recommendations. I know that many of the people in the audience here has access to officials at the state, local, and national level. I know that the people on this stage have access to officials at the local, state, and federal level. So as we prepare to pivot and move into the last 100 days before the election of a new president of the United States of America, I want us to end by suggesting out loud what we're prepared to do for the people in terms of advocating for policy. So with that being said, what types of policy recommendations do you think that we need to be putting forth that will benefit us, the adults in this audience, and the children that mean so, grandchildren, many of them have grandchildren, that means so much to them?
Sure, I guess I can go first. I will say we do need a faith-based office at the state level. When you look at funding, churches are not traditional businesses. They have business principles, but they're not businesses. And so to do work in community, a lot of times I know there's, because of what we've seen happen in churches and in religion, there's some disdain, and rightfully so. However, when those religious institutions that look to do good in the community, they can't do it without the proper funding. To open up their doors, whether it's to house migrants, whether it's to feed the hungry, they're creating an expense. There's a program that we run out of my office called Safe Haven, where churches can respond to an RFQ, and if they respond successfully, they're awarded a contract to open up their doors to provide out-of-school time activities. Those churches are paid $200 a day, one worker for every 15 students. But people will scream and holler and say that the church, they don't need money. Why give your money to the church? We need more funding so that other community-based organizations can step up to the plate and do what the government should be doing and has the capacity to do, right? We need funding. And so when you look at policies that will help institute the fact that we have funding, the adequate funding, so that we can indeed feed the hungry, house the houseless, and put clothes on our young people's backs. I'll share this story as I end my remarks. I'll never forget 2 years ago as we were preparing to bury my grandmother, the matriarch of my family. There was a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old that was standing outside at 9 o'clock at night. They came, my family members came, and they asked me, Alan, to come and talk to these young boys. So I went and asked them, I said, what are you all still doing outside? And they said, well, their aunt had locked them out, and so they were out in the street. I walked them down to the home. I knock on the door. No one comes to the door, so I called 911. The police finally showed up. Eventually, the aunt opened the door and allowed the young people in. I made it my business to make sure that I went back when school started on that first day of school. I went up to the school to see if those young boys were there. Well, when I went to school that day, those young people, they were not there. I went down the street, knocked on the door. The aunt came to the door, and she said, the reason why those young people weren't at school is because she didn't have the proper school clothing for them to go to school that day. I told her, I said, that's inexcusable. I said that there are so many people in this community that would help her with those young boys to make sure that they had adequate clothing. I connected those young people to a neighborhood church. And I tell you, after they connected with that church made sure that those young boys, not only did they have clothing to go back to school the next day, but they ensured that those young people went through that entire school year with food in their home, with clothing for their backs, and made sure that those young people were safe. That is why we need funding for our faith-based organizations and other CBOs to ensure the safety and the academic progress for our young people.
One policy recommendation, we talk about funding. Funding is definitely an issue, but how we fund education is the biggest challenge for us. Funding it through property tax dollars, funding the pension system through property tax dollars is not really working for the average American. So finding ways and solutions to absolutely shift the funding formula from you all, from property owners, from people, everyday people who are challenged, absolutely challenged with just housing insecurities will be a big help for us.
And I'll say really quickly, accessibility to Wi-Fi. What we have found is that there are certain neighborhoods that do not have the same Wi-Fi capability as other neighborhoods, and they are running lower in their capability and paying higher. And so if we are looking at YouTube and all of these other type of careers, they need accessibility to Wi-Fi. And so that's my recommendation.
And so there you have it. Can we give our distinguished panelists a nice round of applause? And panelists, again, I can't help but to think about the skills and the expertise that is sitting in this audience. Can we give our viewing audience, with all the skills and talents that we know that they have, a nice round of applause? Thank you for being here. And remember that the push is on.
Check. All right, let's show them some love, you all. Let's give another round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Whitaker, and this great panel. We want to have some entertainment, some music, just to liven it up a little bit as our next panel begins to prepare themselves. Thank you so much for working with us through the weather and through transition. Are you guys enjoying yourselves so far?